G'day ladies and gentlemen, how you all doing? ScottyD49 here with you. Today I've got another intro to a new series that we're going to be doing here on the channel, and it's going to be a great one. I'm keen to tell you a bit more about it and the origins of it as well. But before we jump into it, I want to thank everyone that has subscribed to the channel as well. And if you haven't already, feel free to hit that sub button and let's jump into it, ladies and gentlemen. Alrighty, so without further ado, this series is called For the New Guy. So a bit of backstory behind this. Back when I was doing a podcast several years ago, focused on Warhammer 40,000 competitive content at the end of 5th edition right the way through towards the end of 7th edition, me and my co-host came up with this series when we would do codex reviews. And so we'd kind of do a bit of an army build as well as how to start the army for, a reasonable price. So I decided, you know what, why not bring you guys that idea but expand it a little bit. As I said, this series is going to be called For the New Guy. And so the goal of this series is to give you, as either a new or an existing player to Warhammer 40,000, the basic information about every faction in the game to help you figure out which one you want to play or want to play next. If you have already got an army or a few and you want to figure out that next faction you're wanting to pick up for the game. So we're going to talk about every single faction of the game. And now the one thing I will say up front is we're not going to go through all the Space Marine chapters. We're only going to go through those ones that have got large deviations from the main codex. So ones like Blood Angels, Space Wolves, Dark Angels, Death Watch. Those ones we'll go through, but not necessarily ones like Ultramarines, Salamanders, those kind of ones as well. But what I plan to cover in each faction is gonna be the following. And first up, we're going to talk about the lore and the background of each army. So I'll run through a brief summary of the lore and the background of the army, so you get a history of them as well as their place in the galaxy, a little bit of context as to why they're there, and it'll also help to explain any in-game mechanics and how the army functions as well. In some cases, for example, Genestealer Cult, they like to hide and be sneaky and burrow their way in, and it really does inform some of their rules mechanics. So it'll be able to set you up for a decent understanding as to why that army works the way it does. The second part will be the pros and cons. So each faction within the game of Warhammer 40,000 has their own distinct pros and cons in terms of how they play in the game. Now, I'll be specifically discussing 3 pros for each army so that you have potential reasons as to why you want to collect that army if those pros appeal to how you enjoy playing the game. I'll also do the same for the cons, so I'll cover 3 cons for each army as potential reasons you might not want to choose to play this army within the game as well, or not collect it, as it won't just be based around the core mechanics of the army or the rules or how they play in the game. Could also be around the fact that you require a lot of models for a certain faction, things like that. The third part we'll cover off on is the core rules of the army. So much like the pros and cons, each faction will have their own core rules that affect all the units or the majority of units on the battlefield when you're using that army on the tabletop. And it will also give you an idea of how the army functions as a whole for the army-wide rules. So for example, when we get into Space Marines, combat doctrines is a big thing for Space Marines, so we'll talk about those, for example. The fourth thing that we'll be looking at covering is starting the army. Now, this can be one of the most intimidating things to figure out with how to best start a new army, so I'll be preparing several different options for you to choose from when doing so. Now, I will say up front, these won't be competitive options. These will actually be cost-effective options. One of these will include discussion about the combat patrol for the army, as well as at least one instead of picking that combat patrol for roughly the same entry cost. So the goal of these options is to help you start collecting the army and getting in small combat patrol size games, so 500 point games, for around, if not less than, 250 Australian dollars for the miniatures to start off with. Now, to think about it, that's about 2 points per dollar spent, if not a bit more than that. So it's a good marker for what you're potentially looking at to start off with smaller games. Then following on from the starting the army portion, we also have the next steps. Now, very similar to starting the army, it can be quite intimidating to figure out what you want to add to your army to get it up to that incursion level, so that 1,000-point mark. And, depending on the models you want to pick from, some of them mightn't work for what you're trying to do, or what you already existingly have. This is also why I'll be going through several next step options, very similar to the start in the army options, and building off each option as well, so you're able to build an army where all the units work well together, and so it's kind of that cohesive force, not necessarily competitive by any means, but you're able to get some games in, and I'll be making sure that you're able to cover off on some bases. You'll have some anti-tank firepower. If it's a psycho-heavy army, you'll have some psychers. If it's a combat-focused army, you'll have several combat units. Like, those kind of things, depending on what that army is, and what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, I'll be building around those so that it's able to give you a taste of all the various elements of that army. Now, I'll also aim to keep these options around 250 Australian dollars as well, so that the next batch of miniatures with the starting the army portion as well, for roughly 1,000 points, you're looking at no more than 500 Australian dollars. Now, a lot of people are going to think that's a lot of money. In some cases, which we're going to start off with, Space Marines and Necrons are going to be the two factions we look at. Some options actually work out to be a lot cheaper for those two factions, using some of the other box sets as well. And ladies and gentlemen, that covers everything that I'll be looking at when it comes to this new series. I'm really excited to be sharing with you about every faction within the game, as well as their lore and background, how they play on the tabletop, as well as ways to get started with them in, cost-effective ways outside of the start collecting or combat patrol boxes as well. Now, I will also note that some factions will have more videos than others. This is just dependent on how much information that there is for each of these sections. However, generally, I will state it now that starting the army and the next step videos will always be independent. So they'll be each other's own videos. So it means that you can watch the starting the army video and then go, cool, I've got these options, and then go into the next steps video and be like, cool, I've got these options to build off these options back in the starting the army video. And that about covers it for the introduction to this series, ladies and gentlemen. Alrighty everyone, well, I hope you're excited and hyped up for this new series as I am. I'm keen to be bringing you some more content focused on beginning 40k, and not just going through the core mechanics or list building or anything like that, but going through the factions, allowing you to get an understanding of how to start them, the pros and cons of each of them, and the history and the lore and the background of why those factions act the way they do, their place in the galaxy, as well as the impact that they have on other forces around them. But ladies and gentlemen, if you do have anything you're excited to see or you want to see in this series, feel free to let me know down in the comments below, as well as feel free to like and subscribe on the channel. And if you do want to have any suggestions, you don't want to pop them in, feel free to come over to Twitch when I am live on Tuesday and Friday nights and Saturday afternoons, Australian Eastern Standard Time. Currently, where we do hobby sessions on the weekends, I do sometimes travel to tournaments and do live coverage there as well. And, we also get live games in from time to time too. So it's always great to be able to be talking with you all about Warhammer 40k and sharing about my experience within the game as well. Also, feel free to find the Discord details down below, where we've got over 120 members in the Discord. It's the best place to find out when I'm live, as well as when things get published here on YouTube. And you get to interact with other people, sharing hobby progress you're working on, as well as any questions you might have about the game, any follow-ups from any of these videos in this series outside of YouTube as well. If you want more of an in-depth discussion, it's a great place to go for that. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope to catch you in the first video of the series. See you soon.